John Ulzheimer is known as one of our nation's most recognized credit experts. Having worked for 28 years in the credit industry, John has become one of the most prolific speakers about credit and the go-to authority on answers to credit-related questions. Credit Countdown with John Ulzheimer.
Hello, my name is John Ulzheimer. I am a consumer credit expert. I have been in the credit industry for almost 30 years. I've spent time at FICO, which is the company behind the FICO credit scoring system, and Equifax, which is one of the three generally recognized credit reporting agencies in the United States. And so today I'm going to tackle a myth that is being spread by self-styled financial experts. And I use the word expert with air quotes. So the question is regarding credit scores, and credit scores, the accusation is that credit scores reward consumers for going into debt. So they almost act as an enticement in some people's minds for people to go into debt. So I'm going to explain why that is factually inaccurate. And rather than just, get angry and say, no, it's wrong, and call people names like most people do in soft-headed arguments, I'm actually going to lay out my position with facts and explain why credit scores do not reward you for going into debt. In fact, credit scores penalize you for going into debt. All right, so here are some of the reasons why that's just simply incorrect. What I have listed here are some of the components in FICO's credit scoring systems and VantageScore's credit scoring systems. Those two scoring platforms, FICO and VantageScore, account for about 100% of the market for credit scores in the United States. And so when we're talking about FICO and VantageScore, that's kind of it when it comes to scoring systems go. So if you kind of created a pie chart, if you will, and I apologize for this being small, if you created a pie chart and you had to essentially attribute some percentage of the metrics in credit scoring systems to debt-related measurements, it's about a third of the points. So between 30 and 35% of the points in your credit score are driven based on debt-related metrics, which means that there are a variety of measurements that credit scores consider when they're looking at your credit reports in the scoring process that are specific to debt. So we know that things like payment history and inquiries and how old your credit report is, and then the mixture of different types of accounts, we know that all that stuff is influential to your credit scores, and they all have different parts of the pie chart attributed to them. But specifically, I'm going to talk about the debt-related metrics to help to kind of blow up this false narrative about credit scores rewarding you for being in debt. So number one, credit scoring systems have a metric that will penalize you if you have too many accounts with balances, okay? And guess what? If you have a bunch of debt, you're going to have a lot of accounts with balances, and therefore your score is going to be penalized as a result. Too many accounts with balances. One of the examples that I commonly use when I talk about this one is kind of around the holiday shopping season, towards the end of the year, when people go, before COVID, they would go to the mall and buy things at the mall on retail store credit cards, and they would have all what I call nuisance balances. They would have nuisance balances all over their credit reports because they felt like they had to use specific store credit cards at those specific stores. They ended up with smaller balances across a bunch of different cards. And then they wondered why their credit scores were lower the following month. And one of the reasons is because they had too many accounts with balances, where before they would have just used maybe one credit card or two credit cards to buy everything, like a Visa or a MasterCard or a Discover or an American Express, and then leave it at that versus spreading account balances across a bunch of cards. So again, problem, don't do this. Next, the various balance to limit ratios on your credit cards. And so there's a metric in credit scoring systems called revolving utilization. Some people refer to it as the credit utilization rate. It's kind of the same thing, even though credit utilization rate really isn't the technically accurate term. It's really revolving utilization. This is the relationship between the balances on your credit cards and the credit limits on your credit cards expressed as a ratio or a percentage. Again, if you have balances on your credit cards on your credit reports, then you're going to have a ratio greater than 0. And the higher that ratio, the fewer points you earn for this particular metric, and therefore the lower your score is going to be. Yet another example of how credit scores penalize you for being in debt. Next, loan balances to the loan amounts ratios. This one is not terribly important, but it's still something that can be influential to your score, so I did want to add it to the list. So this is going to be whatever the balance happens to be on your installment loans relative to the maximum amount that you borrowed. So if you have a $500,000 mortgage balance, but you took out $600,000 when you originally bought your house, then the ratio is going to be $500,000 relative to $600,000. So this ratio can be influential in your scores, yet another reason why being in debt is not the best thing for your scores. And then finally, past due balances. In FICO's and VantageScore's credit scoring systems, having past due balances are going to penalize you. Of course, being past due on anything is going to penalize you. But having a past due balance means what? That you were in debt at one time. So these 4 specific ratios and metrics, actually the past due balances is going to go into the component, the other 35% category called payment history. So we're actually transcending more than one category here, 2 very influential categories, mind you, that are specifically tied to debt. So the next time you hear someone go on television and try to sell something to you, and they're pounding a book and they're vilifying credit reports and they're vilifying credit scores and they're vilifying credit cards and they're vilifying loans, and they're basically vilifying everything that has anything to do with the credit industry, and they start blabbering about how being in debt is something that you're rewarded for being in debt because of credit scoring systems, just think about all these metrics that clearly penalize you for being in debt. And by the way, these are not made up by John Ulzheimer. These can be found very easily in about 8 seconds using Google on the FICO and the VantageScore websites. So do a little bit of research. That would be my suggestion before you kind of fall for this false narrative. And if you manage these things properly, then you're going to earn fantastic credit scores. Thank you very much for watching. Drop some comments in the section below. I always like my comments. And we'll talk again soon. Have a great rest of your day.
For more videos and credit tips from John Ulzheimer, go to www.tradelinesupply.com.